Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Lat, and I'm currently finishing my PhD journey. Hopefully, I get submit October. Today, I'd like to present one of my PhD papers on designing an auction for buyback groundwater in agriculture for environmental purpose. And this paper has been published in the Journal of Agriculture Economics and has received winning prize in the prize essay competition of the Agriculture Economic Society of the UK. For this achievement, I would like to thank to my supervisors for all of their technical guidance and support, Sai, James, and Steve, to make this happen. There are some motivation behind this research. First of all, groundwater is declining globally. This is because of the over-extraction of human activities, and particularly in agriculture, because it's the largest user of groundwater. In addition to that, reduced rainfall as a result of climate change intensifies the degradation of groundwater. All of this should go to the consequences in the groundwater-dependent ecosystem, and there is an urgent to reallocate groundwater from agriculture for the environmental purpose. There are many approaches to reduce groundwater extraction in agriculture, from top-down uniform reduction and market-based instrument. The most commonly used is a top-down uniform reduction in groundwater allocation to the users. And because the groundwater user and groundwater aquifer are spatially heterogeneous, it will result in a huge profit loss to irrigators. The market-based instrument offer a more flexible approach to reduce the groundwater extraction to agriculture. It has been proven more cost-effective, and it can offer a way to compensate the loss of the irrigators. Just a brief introduction of the buyback auction. So, in a buyback auction, there is only one single buyer and multiple sellers. This is different from a commercial auction where there are many buyers and only one sellers. The purpose of the auction in the groundwater context is to either maximize the target volume of water or to minimize budget to buy back the target of water. And the selection of winner in this type of auction is also different from a commercial auction. The selection is based on the lowest bid. So it starts from the lowest bid until the target until reaching the target of water, or until the budget exhausted. This type of auction is often seen in many natural conservation, such as fisheries, land, and surface water conservation. And there are many studies that explore the design of the buyback auction in that kind of context. But in the groundwater context, in the literature, up to now, there is no single study that explore the design of the auction. So this paper addresses the literature gaps. The objectives of the paper is to compare the budgetary and environmental performance of the buyback auction under different scenarios of groundwater. The first scenario is the selection of the auction format, either volume target constraint or budget constraint. And the second scenario is to explore the role of the environmental benefit index in a budget constraint auction. This is to address the uncertainty of a budget constraint auction to achieving an environmental target. In this scenario, we consider two types of environmental benefit index, which is the group-based and an individual-based EBI. And the group-based is EBI is constructed based on group's average distance from farmers to the groundwater-dependent ecosystem, and an individual EBI is based on the individual specific distance. And all of this scenario will be considered in two types of constraint: small size of constraint, or you can say restricted constraint, or the large size of constraint, which is more like more generous constraints. Okay, so we use an agent-based model to study the objectives of the paper. I'll spend a bit of time in this. In our agent-based model, we have two different types of agent. The first one is the water regulator, and the second type is the farmers or the bidders. So at first, the water regulators will pre-specify budget or target depending on if they want to use the budget constraint or target constraint. And then the auction starts and farmers submitting bids. In here, farmers submit bids based on the volume of water that they want to sell and the price of per unit of water that they want to put in a bid. And in order to make profit, the price per unit of water that they want to put in the bid should not be less than the opportunity cost of such water used for farming activities. And in order to estimate the opportunity cost per kiloliter of water, we run farm profit optimization for each individual farmer. And then because this opportunity cost varies and uncertain, so we use a uniform distribution to randomly draw the opportunity cost of farmer for 1,000 replications. Okay, next, when farmers submit bid, then the water regulator or the auctioneer will select winners. And in this selecting winners, in this phase is where we model all the design of the auction. So the selection bidding models of regulators will be different depending on what type of auction that they want to run. Either they want to do the target constraint or budget constraint, or either they want to have a budget constraint with or without the environmental benefit index. And then the auction ends. When the auction ends, and the water regulator will measure the auction performance based on their performance criteria, which I will talk about it later, and announces winners. And when winners are announced, a farmer receives the auction result. Based on the result of their bid, so like either they are selected or not, and based on their profit of the previous bidding round, they will use that information to construct the bidding in the next round. But note that this is a one-off auction, so which means that the farmer only have one chance to bid. However, because we want to mimic the reality that the farmers can learn from different like other experience, or they can hire a consultant to like consult like what kind of like how much should they bid. So we try to mimic that reality by implement the farmers bidding reinforcement learning model, and we run it for 10 rounds. This is because we don't want to run it until they have an optimal bid, so we just have a 10 rounds, and the learning is on the first 9 rounds, and the result of the auction will be used at the round 10. And yeah, and after that, the replication finished, and we'll restart again at the different opportunity cost of farmer. So now I will talk more about each submodel. So in submodel 1 is where the farmer is where we want to determine the opportunity cost of farmer. So submodel 1, the objective of farmer is to maximize their gross margin, their benefit, and the constraint of their production is the availability of groundwater allocation and the availability of the farming area. And farmer can decide on how much area that they want to allocate for which type of crop, and how much water that they want to extract in order to maximize their benefit. And once we find from this model, we identify the gross margin the optimal gross margin per kiloliter of water of farmers, and we use that to construct a farmer's bidding equation. And in the farmer bidding equation here, we have the GWI is the groundwater allocation limit of which is allocated to each farmer, and the gross margin is defined from the model. So 2 of these variables are already given. Farmers only decide on the proportion alpha to determine like how much volume of water that they want to sell, and the markup beta to determine the price that they want to put in a bid. in a submodel 2 is the model of water regulator. So the auctioneer or the water regulator can choose either they have a fixed target of water, and when they have the fixed target of water, what they want is to minimize the total payment to bidders. And when they decide that, okay, I have a fixed budget, and then when they have fixed budget, the objective is to maximize the total volume of water bought back. But in the environmental benefit index scenario, when we incorporated that, the objective of the regulator changed to maximize the total volume of environmental water, which is the volume of water that adjusted to the environmental benefit index that they want to buy back from farmers, which here we indicated as the TD prime. So this graph shows how we constructed the environmental benefit index for the auction. This graph shows the relationship between the in the vertical. Okay, so this graph shows the relationship between the environmental damage caused by the groundwater extraction of farmers, and on the x-axis is the distance from farmers to the groundwater dependent ecosystem. And as you see, when the distance increase, the less impact on the environment, the water extraction cost. And this was constructed based on our previous publication, where we run a hydroeconomic model and internalize the environmental externality of groundwater extraction of farmer. And the V prime is the total volume of water adjusted to the EBI, and this is how we identify the relationship. Okay, in submodel 3, I bring back the farmer's bidding equation here, just to make it clear. So farmers in the bidding equation, they decide on the proportion of groundwater alpha, and this proportion take values from 0.2 to 0.6. We limit at 60% because we want to we assume that farmers still want to keep 40% to continue their farming activities. So we just limit to 60% that they want to sell. And then for the markup of the water price beta, it takes value from 1.1 to three values, 1.1, 1.3, and 1.5. This is we decided based on the result of some experimental papers on the other conservation studies that the markup of bidders is usually about average is about 35%. But because those papers are not really groundwater related, and this auction is like one-off auction over 10 years, so we increase the markup into up to 50%. And 5 values of the proportion alpha and 3 values of beta will generate a total 15 bidding strategies. And in the reinforcement learning, the first round of bid, one of the 15 bidding strategy was randomly allocated to each individual farmer. But from the next round, the farmer's bidding selection will be based on the result of the previous bidding round and the profit of the previous bidding rounds, and then a fixed recency parameter, which determine the impact of the past result on the present action, and a fixed experimentation parameter, which determine how quickly they want to settle on a certain strategy if such a strategy generates profits. We use 3 performance criteria to compare the different auction scenarios. The budgetary cost effectiveness, which is equal to the total payment divided by total volume of water purchase. The environmental cost benefit ratio, which is the total equal to total payment divided by the total economic value of avoided environmental damage. And the total environmental damage cost reduction is the sum of all the avoided environmental damage based on the water volume that they can purchase. And then the last one is adjusted budgetary cost effectiveness. This scenario, this is only used for EBI scenarios because we have the total water adjusted to the EBI. So these two the ECBR and the TDCR, we can consider that it's the environmental performance, and the BC is the budgetary cost effectiveness performance. And so we calibrate our model based using the study site is Ngangara groundwater area in Western Australia, and in 3 sub areas is Karabuda, Nawayap, and Yarrabah. And this region plays an important role in the agricultural production in Perth. And you can see here there are many groundwater dependent ecosystems in the area. The green is the bushland, and the blue is the wetlands. And because of the increasing degradation of the groundwater dependent ecosystem, government, the water authority in Perth is proposing a uniform groundwater allocation cut to the irrigators, and this raises concern to farmers and agricultural sectors in the region. We selected 22 farmers profile as the bidder profiles that we use in the model, based on depending on the availability of the data that we need. Here is some of the parameters on the target constraint, budget constraint, and these parameters are mostly calculated, estimated based on our previous publication. And the recency parameter we used from faculty's paper, and the experimentation parameter is our own assumption. Okay, so this is the result. The first set of result comparing the budget constraint and the target constraint auction in the small and large size of constraints. And as you can see in here, we found no statistical significant difference between TC and BC in all performance criteria, but in the large size of constraint, where the constraints are more generous, so like larger budget and larger target or volume, we found a statistical significant difference. So the budget constraint auction outperformed the target constraint auction in terms of budgetary cost effectiveness and the total damage cost reduction. So the lower value of BC indicates the better performance, and the higher value of the total damage cost reduction indicate the better performance of the auction. And so here's the result between the budget constraint auction without EBI in environmental benefit index and with environmental benefit index. And here I only present the main result. And the first set of result was that because in the environmental benefit index scenario, the objective of the water regulator is to maximize the total environmental water. So of course, the performance of the EBI scenario in terms of environmental performance criteria is better than the no EBI scenario, and we found all statistical significant difference. But incorporating the environmental benefit index would decrease the performance of the auction in terms of budgetary cost effectiveness. It is because when we target purchase for a group of bidders, it will increase rent-seeking behaviors of those bidders, and at the same time, the total volume of water purchase is lower. So we can see that the no EBI scenarios have better performance in terms of this criteria. And between the group EBI and individual EBI, we found all other that I don't present here statistically significant difference, but we also found that there is no statistical significant difference in all performance criteria between the group environmental benefit index and the individual environmental benefit index at a large size of constraint of the auction. So just to clarify a bit, because when you use the group EBI, it will reduce the burden, administrative burden cost, because constructing the individual EBI based on the specific distance of each individual will be more complex and will be maybe more costly. So the results show there is no statistical significant difference between the two, which means that you can use the more simple approach to for the auction. Okay, conclusion. So what we conclude is that the choice of an auction format, of budget constraint or target constraint, would depend on the severity of the constraint on target and budget, and if the constraint is large, the budget constraint is recommended. And the size of saving will be up to like $1.3 million in our case, in our large size of constraint. This is from the better budgetary cost effectiveness, and plus the better total damage reduction. And incorporating EBI in a budget constraint auction to guide the buyback is essential to increase the probability of reaching the environmental goal in a limited budget, and the size of saving would be up to 6.19 million in a small constraint. This is also from the damage cost reduction and total payment. And in the context where bidders are distributed broadly, in our case studies like that, then using group-based EBI would reduce administrative cost, because it's generate like the same result as the individual EBI. Okay, so there is some assumption that we made in our model. First, we don't account for the participation rate. This is because currently the government is proposing a uniform allocation cut to the groundwater user in the sub-region that we are calibrating. So if there is any buyback option exist, they would like 100% sure that will participate in that. But actually, in other case, participation rate, lack of participant would affect significantly the performance of the auction. So this should be taken into account in the future work. And the second one is, even though we have 15 bidding strategies, but in reality, the human can make more bidding strategy than that. So future work can incorporate the more flexible behavior in the bidding strategy selection of bidders. And the third one is that even though we incorporate the heterogeneity in the opportunity cost of farmers, but we use a homogeneous production cost among farmers and over 10 years. So this could also be expanded in future work. Okay, so that is my presentation today, and this is an interesting paper. It's not because I did it, but it's something new in the groundwater context. So if you want to find more details, you can have a read. Thank you.
Everyone, Steve just sent me a message saying you had won the UK student IE prize for the second paper. Which paper is that? That one. Okay. So this has won the prize and it's published as well. Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I have some questions because it's something I work on, but I'm going to give priority to others who would like to ask a question.
Thank you for the presentation. You alluded about the policy change. What do you know now about policy?
So the policy on the groundwater now. So currently, they are considering the cuts to groundwater allocation to user, not only agriculture, but also public supply and all other users, because of the climate change and declining groundwater table level in Angara. And actually, when they are proposing at first they proposed 25% of the cut to the irrigators in the sub-regions that we are studying. But it faced like a lot of disagreement from the farmers and from the Wanneru government, because it's the agriculture sector contribute a lot to the region. So yeah, they are kind of like having a proposal like suggesting other mechanisms such as like infrastructure, irrigation investment, or like water market based instrument like in the Murray-Darling Basin to address that rather than a uniform cut. But I haven't heard yet about like what they're gonna do.
Could we go back a couple of slides to the conclusions? So I must admit I didn't quite keep up for some of the results at the end there. So this might be a silly question. So you've got in a budget constrained model.
Yeah.
So looking at the second one. It's a budget constrained model, but then there's a savings. So I'm interested in how, if it's a budget constraint model, aren't you using all of the budget up to the constraint?
Yeah, it's this size of saving is more on the environmental value, so the economic value of the environmental damage reduction.
It's not, okay, it's not a financial saving, it's an environmental benefit.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
You sort of mentioned that using the individual distance involves higher administrative costs. I'm just wondering, because I don't know how the model actually works in reality. But given the information, like the geographic information, it's fully available and ready, and then and I just wonder how much that could add to the administrative cost. Because to me, it's just simple. Okay, have that information, you have this optimization, and you have a generic result. Individual distance allows, having this information to capture it, give you better savings. That's just.
So
I just don't know how much more administrative cost that would add to the actual management of this.
Yeah. So let me go back to this one where I present the individual and the group EBI. So in the group EBI, so basically in order to construct the individual EBI would take more like modeling works and more. Basically, you have to estimate like the water extraction from specific point, how it would affect the environmental damage from the water extraction point in specific distance. However, because in this model we already have that kind of information, but in general, if you group base, so you group for example, you group the farmers in the first 300 meters, and then you assign only like the EPI at the 300 meter only, and you use it from like 0 to 300, and from 300 to 600 you use another based on just the average one. It would be like reduce so much kind of cost of even implementation when you have to choose the bidder. Let's say you have to do the bidder selection, and you have to look into the how specific distance of them like affect, like the environmental damage. It would be, I would assume that it would take more time compared to like if you just have like one EPI for the whole group of bidders. I hope that clarifies.
Okay, online side has a question. Side, go ahead.
Okay, Lan, please go to the conclusion slide. Actually, I have this recommendation and the comment that it's we are saying that budget constraint auction is better if the competition or the target is large, and that would depend on the level of competition, and that would be an endogenous factor. Like after we would know this, like whether it's competitive enough or not after we run the auction. So we could change the recommendation to say that we should suggest always to use budget constraint because in a small scale constraints, there is not much difference. And we know in a larger scale one, budget constraint is better. So I think we can modify this suggestion.
Okay. So Said's comment is because we know the budget constraint works better when it's small scale and also works better when it's large scale. Well, at least works better when it's large scale. We could just say that the budget constraint is the preferred one.
Yes, thank you.
I have a question. I have many questions, but I will ask just one. If you are doing budget constraint and target constraint, they have to be matched.
Yeah.
So when you compare two options, we should be comparing apples with apples. The level of competition should be exactly the same.
Yeah.
So you might have seen some of the work Sophie on multi-unit options.
Yeah.
That keeps things under control. So in this case, the tricky bit is I come with a budget and say I'm going to spend 20 million, but I don't know what the target equivalent is because how much I can buy with that 20 million depends on what's out there, and I don't know that. So when I go to research, how do I know what level of target is equivalent to what budget? Because that's difficult to know. If I were using an option that forces bidders to bid truthfully, like a second price option or a credit type option, and if I am doing a simulation, I know I am creating the cost structure, so I can work out what the equivalence would be because I know how they are going to be. But in this case, it's a bit tricky. It's like a tautological to say that when the competition is weak, that's what's happening. If you scale up the option, the competition is weak. When the competition is weak, well, when you use a target option, basically you are giving them blank checks. They will tell you how much it's going to cost you. Okay? But when you have a budget constraint, you have put a lid on how much they can take from you. So you are imposing a competition on them. So that's it with tautological. So you need to be careful there. I said I wouldn't ask more than one, but also with the other competitions, you have to be careful. What exactly are you learning? If I come and say, when I use a better measure of outcomes like an API-based, I would expect, without doing any research, to my outcomes to be better. Because I'm using a better way of judging things. So when you get to that, what's the role of the research? So you need, it's not about whether something is improving things. You should focus on by how much. And then that should be the focus. So that way it's useful to the using it. But if you tell them, well, if you went to the trouble of using better metrics, the outcomes would be better, they would say, well, obviously it's going to be better. But the value of the research is by how much. Should they go to the trouble to use that? I have questions about the simulation, but that's boring stuff. I can see later. Steve, do you have questions?
Yes, I put my question on chat.
I think yes. I think the question of the model does affect the results. Because first of all, like when we assume that homogeneous production cost among farmers, that is very like in the reality, the farmers like very different, heterogeneous. They might use like cheaper input or expensive input. So yeah, it can affect the result of the auction. But because the model is already complex, so we have to simplify some. We only can account for several bigger issues. But yeah, like
so yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I'm just sort of puzzling a bit about the behavioural assumptions behind. So, do farmers know their EBI?
Do farmers know?
Yeah, do they know that their reduction in water is high value or flow down?
Yeah. So in this option, we don't modeling that knowledge. They don't know about their value of water, environmental value of water. But I guess in the EBI scenario, when based on the bidding result, the people who like get a lot of selected, like when they more often selected, they must know that their water are better than others.
So I bid. I don't know initially what my EBI is,
Yes.
but I'm successful. Do you then update their information, and how do you update information?
So in this, we use a reinforcement learning algorithm. So we use only 9 rounds of bidding as a learning, and the first round is the bidding strategy. Like as you said, they don't know, they just randomly bid. But in the second round, when they update the strategy, it will depend on the previous result. So like if they getting selected or not, and or if they how much the profit that they get, and then it depends on other 2 experimental parameters, then they can decide.
So over the rounds, do they actually if they are high EBI, then they increase the rent that they receive?
Yeah, they increase the rent. Actually, we also want to do this to like kind of do this in a laboratory economic experiment to find out more on the behavior of real behavior of participants, and then we also want to model like into the role of information sharing, like whether they know about EBI or not EBI. But because of the COVID, so we cannot really do that. Yeah, but it's something that we also are very interested in to find out more.
So does the cost effectiveness of the auction fall through time?
Yeah.
The results to the Department of Water.
No, but actually, I think like James suggested me to do that. Yeah, because but last time I presented the poster paper about this to Warren, and he kind of saying like, it depends on how you constructed the EBI and things like that. So, yeah, but I think like the next paper, like my next research on the choice experiment, might be they might be more interested in that.
Yeah, one squeeze, okay?
Yeah, just to follow up on Dan's comment on the behavior aspect. Does it also matter whether farmers will have information before bidding starts? But if I know that the decision is based on the environmental benefits that's resulting from that.
So they've got 9 rounds to learn.
That's why I'm saying that the information is information have not gain, learning during the process. But say there's a briefing information session before the whole thing starts, and tell everyone it's just to balance the water needs from the environmental side and then farmers, and they would know that my water values more to the environment than someone far away, and that information is going to have an impact on their bidding.
Yeah.
So they know, but what happens is it's indirect. So if I win, I know it's a combination of my cost and the value of my water, but I cannot work out how much is due to what. Although my cost, I might. So eventually they sort of get the message when they see that. But if you know the upfront, how stuff is going to do, all they have to do is measure the distance, and they would know automatically. So they would learn faster, right?
So they go to Google Maps and they learn their distance pretty quickly.
If he gives them the formula, they know, then it's faster.
Yeah, it's something we want to do in the experiment, actually. Experimental companies.
You didn't just one. You didn't present any curve. So I was wondering, because with 10 rounds, so they bid for 10 rounds and the results come at the end.
So we use the result of the final round to in the auction only. So the first 9 rounds we don't use.
So there are random starting points. So you are simulating. So random starting points. 1 round. You got to keep doing that many times to average the results. How many replications did you do?
So we have 1,000 replications like a different opportunity cost of farmers, and then we have 10 rounds a bid, and 15 strategies and 22 farmers.
And when you draw your curves at that, was they smooth like in agent-based modeling ones, or a bit rather like the experimental ones? That's the difference, because you don't have cost constraints, right?
Yeah.
Were they smooth?
I actually have the result. I actually did draw the curve, but I couldn't really remember now. But in the paper, I did present.
Lan, they smooth it out.
Yeah, so I explained something.
They smooth it out. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so we will stop. Thank you, Lan, and good luck with your